Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game news and reviews and game design and all the stuff. I am Old Man Merwin here with less old man Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, welcome to the middle of December.
Yes, I have succeeded at being on a ladder and putting up lights. I felled a Christmas tree right after a family member said that, well, I guess we'll wait for you to cut that tree. And I was like, watch this. And I sawed through that thing with dad-powered ire in just seconds. It was great. And yeah, we held the Christmas tree. It snowed, and we saw a rainbow all while getting a Christmas tree. If that isn't...
That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. Last year, I used the snowblower maybe once. I don't even know if I used it once last year. This year, I used it 3 times in one day. And probably 8 times over the last 2 weeks, because the lake effect snow here has been brutal, as it often is. We usually just get the edge of it because the real snow belt is just to the north of us, but it creeped down and we got absolutely hammered by it. So now it's 45 degrees, everything's melting but I'm sure we've got another batch just waiting for us.
Well, I hope all the bad holiday movies are making up for
that. Yes. Speaking of bad holiday movies.
Yeah.
No, not speaking of bad holiday movies. So what we are going to do this week is, since we got a deluge of questions and comments from our listeners, we're going to do a main segment today of all the back listener questions and comments that we can. So we are going to now just jump right directly into the news this week, because there's a fair bit to talk about.
Yeah.
And we're going to start right away with D&D Beyond adding some stuff, some functionality, if you will, to their maps tabletop. And the things they've added.
The official D&D virtual tabletop, according to one of their recent advertising emails, which I thought was awesome.
It is very strange that the maps team, maybe with blessing, maybe not, keeps talking about it as the official VTT of D&D, of Wizards of the Coast, of Dungeons and Dragons. And Teos and I are sitting there wondering, well, what is the 3D virtual tabletop then? Is that not the unofficial? Is it the secondary? Is it something else completely? We don't know. But we do know that if you use maps, you can now do a few more things. Yeah. You can track monster hit points and see their stat blocks directly in the virtual tabletop as part of the initiative order list. So what did this say to you, Teos? What did you think when you heard the news?
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I'm impressed at how much they keep kind of rolling this out, right? We'd heard some rumors that maybe there was something that existed from, before the acquisition of D&D Beyond, even, that was out there, a virtual tabletop they'd begun work on. But they have, come out with a solid initial release and then added things. And it's easy to say, oh man, hit point tracking, like my other virtual tabletop does that. And sure, but this started as something, really light and more like Owlboy or Rodeo. And they keep adding to it and integrating, which is nice. So here, when you now add a monster, it'll pull its stat block across, and it collapses nicely, so you can kind of hide all that and just see the name of the monster in the initiative order, or you can show more and more of the stat block, and you actually can click on like the attacks and the you can click on skills, you can click on things like that to roll the dice behind it, right? If it says D10 plus 5 as the damage roll, you can click on that and off it goes and rolls it. And that's really cool, because before this you had to do that over on something else, right? Like through the plugin that allows D&D Beyond to integrate with like Roll20, or you could do it with being in Discord, right? But you had to kind of move it across that way. Now you can do it directly there. And for hit points, you can just kind of subtract how much it's taken, or state what the current value is, but you also can customize the max value, which is kind of a nice handy thing. So you're able to kind of state this monster has this many hit points to begin with, and it's taken this many, and just kind of track that as you go, which is very cool.
Yeah. Every time a new release comes out where they add a new feature, two things happen. The first thing is tell myself, okay, I'm going to run a game with this. Even if it's just an hour, I just want to see how it works because the second thing I feel is please don't put any more functionality in. I don't want any more functionality.
Right.
Because the reason I don't use other VTTs is because I don't want to learn them and I don't want to go through all even the slightest hassle of connecting one thing to another or having to go into a setting to change for this reason or that reason. So as these new features come out, I want them to be not necessarily optional, but I don't want them to add complexity to what I need to do to be able to run a game.
Yep. Yeah, you want to
And
slap tokens on there, move them, do the simple stuff. Yep.
Yeah. It sounds like this is that. It sounds like you're not having to connect anything. You're not having to do any background programming or even too much just, using the interface, but you're already doing the thing and it's just adding this functionality without making you work any harder.
I agree with you. I think it's still really in a nice sweet spot. And we joked about this before, but when you create a company and you kind of assign departments and you're creating teams and you're giving people different colored shirts. And so when you say the D&D Beyond pillar and you say the virtual tabletop digital pillar, I forget the name of it, like when you put people in different groups, they will do different things. And if I were there or if I were advising somebody, if anybody's listening, and you want a guy, in the peanut gallery, here I am. What I would say is the D&D virtual tabletop that is the 3D version sounds really complex. And maybe that's what it should be, right? A super complex, super amazing thing that you spend the time and you get the payoff of all that investment. Maps should be the opposite, right? The light, really easy thing. And if that's the way these pillars kind of shape up, I think they could both really coexist nicely. You want things super simple, Maps has your back and it's easy integration and all that. If you start to get to that complexity, but you're not getting that absurd payoff that the virtual tabletop is promising, then that's where I think you're fighting each other rather than helping each other out.
Yeah, and here's where I wonder, because it's just in the DNA of sort of the business folks to want to add features, to want to add functionality, and then want to charge more for it. And right now I get Maps free because I'm a subscriber. It's an additional thing. I was already subscribed. It was given to me free. So the moment they raise the subscription price because of Maps, or B, you're right, start adding so much functionality, as I said before, what I would be okay with is there will be this basic Maps there. If you're a subscriber, you get it. We're going to put out a version that you pay for that has these additional features that will let them then start to compete on a more equal level with some of the other virtual tabletops like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, et cetera, et cetera. And you want to use this, an extra whatever a month, right? Extra $2 a month, you get the advanced maps that we're coming out with. But don't do what business people always try to do, because it never works out in the end.
True.
And we know all about the encrapification of things that we like and things that are good in an effort to make more money end up becoming less usable, less friendly, and in the end end up dying a death.
And I always think that the funny thing is all companies, and I work with a lot of companies on like interface type stuff around environmental compliance. But on the interface side of things, one thing that companies always forget is they always have a plethora of people in the office that don't actually use the product. And at any point, you can show those people a product and say, this makes sense. And they never do that. They never actually ask these. They've got a number of people they could just say, hey, take this for a spin and tell me what you think. And they never do, right? Because when you do that, that's where you see the like basics that you can shave that time of coming up to speed, making it awesome, reinforce the things that work well, right? Instead of just, getting lost in features. So I know you've had those experiences too.
Yeah, you've got to you put that MBA to use and make the plan. rather than actually doing the due diligence and learning about your product.
Yeah, because that's what will make people really, really enjoy it. So far, so good. Good stuff
Yep.
on the D&D Beyond side so far.
Yep. Keep it up, maps. And also keep it up, D&D the Immersive Quest. I learned about this because one of my friends in Canada said, hey, they've got this thing going on up here in Toronto. It sounds pretty cool. It's a D&D immersive experience. And it's going to be running. It already came out starting December 11th, running for several months. And what you do is you form a party and become a rogue, a druid, a fighter, or a wizard. And then you go through this sort of immersive quest. And it's not 100% clear what exactly you do.
Mm-hmm.
If it's like an escape room type of thing, or a true dungeon kind of thing, or just an experience like walking through and seeing art and interactive exhibits. What really got me interested was then after I'd heard about it and said, oh, that's cool. We should definitely do that. Is that Philippe Antoine Menard, Chatty DM, said that he had left who makes Assassin's Creed? Ubisoft. He left Ubisoft to start or get in on this new project. And this is the project that he was working on.
That's awesome.
So he announced that he had been or is either the main designer or one of the main designers on this experience. What else did you learn about as you read about this, Teos?
Yeah, and it sounds like it has ended up with this sort of like immersive escape roomy type angle, right? So you form a party, you choose whether you're a rogue, druid, fighter, or wizard, and you explore a mysterious dungeon, starting with the Yawning Portal Tavern as a kind of getting started point. Then you go into this mysterious dungeon, you encounter iconic creatures. There was Art of a Beholder. You gather experience points, so you're clearly doing something to kind of get rewarded. And then you face a final epic confrontation, and that takes about an hour, it said in the FAQ. And then you get to hang out as long as you want in the bustling Waterdeep market and enjoy D&D themed drinks and food. So we've got a LinkedIn announcement from Chatty DM, and then we have the events page where you can sign up, and it's already open, so you can go there now if you're in the Toronto area or can get there. It's www.vibrantstudios.events/en/D&D Immersive. Looks great. I'd love to be able to do that.
Yep. So here's the twofer that you need to do, folks. Are you ready for this? There is a D&D exhibit at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, where I mean, it's a great museum on its own. It's got the Toy Hall of Fame. It's got the Video Game Hall of Fame, where you can play old video games, look at old toys, see this amazing collection. Great for kids if you've got kids. So Rochester is about an hour from Buffalo. Toronto is about an hour from Buffalo. So what you do is you plan a day of it, assuming you can cross the border, and just do both.
Yeah.
Get your full D&D thing going.
Love it.
And that's what I hope to do over the next few weeks, because the D&D exhibit at the Strong Museum may close in like February or March. So you're running out of time a little bit on that.
Yeah, and this immersive experience that it would run for several months. So I didn't see an actual end date, but it may depend on kind of how well it does. So go there, show your love if you can, and I'm sure you'll have a blast.
And it's interesting because they use D&D, right? They use Dungeons and Dragons. They use that, which tells me that this is a licensed. Yeah, they use the Yawning Portal Tavern. Yeah. They use Waterdeep Market. So this is a licensed thing that Wizards of the Coast is behind to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah, and this is not in our show notes, but I recently thought I had meant to include it in show notes, which is that we talked about that D&D magazine in the UK that has had a number of issues, and you get kind of fun things with it. It's a format that's used for a lot of products. And I guess typically what's done with these kinds of things is it's a certain number of issues that that go out in this magazine. So it's reached the end of its run. And one of our supporters, Richard Green, who is an amazing designer, works a lot with Kobold Press, does his own world. He has been working on this. Will Doyle, who also supports our show, has been working on it. And I even got to see an issue, which was Flump, featured Flumps. Oh. That's fantastic. And so I got to see how good this is. And what was awesome, and this is where it ties in, is with license things. It was very interesting to me when I opened up the credits page, sure, it thanked, Richard and others who'd been involved, but it had, so James Hake is the editor. That's
Right.
great. Works with Ghostfire. And then it had a number of WotC staff mentioned from sort of layout, art, marketing kind of efforts. So it wasn't just licensed, but kind of like actually using the time of Wizards staff as a sort of collaboration, which I didn't even conceive of D&D sort of doing that kind of arrangement. I thought that was really cool and sort of surprising because you don't hear Wizards talking about this a lot. Maybe there is some promotion going on in the UK, but I thought that was fascinating. And so I wanted to share that, but also say congratulations to Richard Green on an amazing run of that magazine.
Yeah, and I feel like since we're off on a little bit of a tangent, let's continue. That is one of the things that is interesting about D&D and its relationship to Wizards and its relationship to Hasbro. Is that, people, groups, companies may want to license it out for various reasons. You may want to license D&D because you want to make D&D baloney. And you likely don't need a great deal of work from Wizards of the Coast on that.
Yep.
However, if you want to make something like this magazine, then it becomes a careful negotiation of, you're not just licensing our name and our IP. You are requiring us to do a lot of work on our end, both through the business side, the marketing side, the design side, right? Like you said.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, in my case, once, Wizards reached out to me to work on a product that I thought was a product for them, but it was really a product for someone else. And that was this book.
Oh, yeah.
The
World
Builders Journal of Legendary Adventures. And so this was a third-party product that was licensed through Wizards, but Wizards also supplied the content, or at least some of the content for the book. So when you see these third-party products and go, that's not Wizards, why should I bother getting it? It's not official.
Right.
It might be more official than you think.
And that's a good point.
So just be aware of, and on the working side, right, there's opportunities out there. If you are an expert in the rules, if you're an expert in a particular area, to find these opportunities for where you're not doing the licensing yourself, but the licensee or the licensor needs some expertise to fulfill this product's goals.
That's really cool. That's a great point. Yeah. Awesome.
Mike Mearls has a Patreon where he discusses alternative D&D design approaches. His most recent Patreon output talks about death saves. He gives an example of a recent proposal for a new approach to death saves and exhaustion. How did Mike go about this one, Teos?
Yeah, he has a nice conversational style in these posts. So he kind of frames the concept and sort of says, like, I've always hated exhaustion. This is what he says, right? I've hated exhaustion, but I really like death saves. And so what can we do to kind of like try to join the two and sort of solve the problem at hand? And then he kind of speaks to you and says, hey, I'm going to ask you the following questions. And these questions are great because it does get you thinking a lot about what he's talking about. Also because, he has said he plans to put out an RPG at some point, right? So he's actually actively constructing this and thinking through opportunities. But the questions he asks are, what penalties should come with failed death saves? How many failed death saves are enough? And then he says, I also stripped out the 3 saves and you are stabilized rule, simply because I like the threat of death requiring active intervention by other PCs, right? So you're not just going to do it on your own to stop rolling. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Mike asks.
Yeah, these are great questions, and this is a great way to come up with your design. It's not, let me start with what's there. And sometimes when, as a designer, you go out and you start asking these questions, people will use the current rules as etched in stone. And therefore, their answers are always going to be, well, I like how it works now. So the answer is whatever it is.
Yeah.
Uh, and the whole reason for asking these questions and the whole reason for designing new rules is to put all of that aside and say, forget that there is a 3 death save and then you're dead. Forget right now that there are no penalties that come with a failed death save, except getting closer to death. What could we do to make the experience more fun if we changed this and started asking questions? And I would go even further and say, do we even need death saves?
Sure.
But Mike's already said, I like death saves, so I am going to keep that in there.
Yeah.
So let's move forward from this point. And at some point in your design, you also need to do that. You need to start from a foundation and put down the bedrock that you're going to build the rest of this on.
That's a really nice point, though, Shawn, that a lot of times when we're designing, because we're being so thoughtful and we're engineering something and creating something, we can speak about it like it's the new law and like it is now sacrosanct and real and firm, when it's anything but that, right? We're still at play testing, we're still in the rough stages, and we should pose it more as questions and invite others to poke holes on it rather than building it up on a defended, stance. Yeah.
Okay, so what did Mike come up with for some of his thoughts in this?
Yeah, so he says, when your hit points reach 0, you're unconscious and dying, all right? When you become unconscious, everything, all effects, spells, features you control immediately end. You're no longer an enemy or ally for any effects, can't use actions or reactions, so that kind of baseline stuff. When your hit points reach 0 and you start dying, at the start of each of your turns while you're dying, so same as current in 2024, 2014, you have to make a death save. You must also make a death save each time you take further damage while dying. So that part is still there, which I think is interesting. To make a death save, roll a d20. If you roll less than 10, you suffer a failed death save. Otherwise, you forestall death for a moment. A death save is a special saving throw. Normal modifiers don't apply unless it specifically says it does. So here's what happens on the table of failed death saves. 1 failed, nothing. 2, nothing. 3, treat your bloodied hit points, so your half hit point mark, as your maximum hit points. 4 failed saves, death. Okay. Interesting.
So, okay. Lots of things there. So the first thing I'm going to say is, are we going to critique this right now? Are we going to do this live?
Yeah,
are we doing it live?
It's up to you. Do you want to hear the rest of it first? Do you want to think now? Like, I'm open.
I want to talk about it one step at a time.
Yeah, go
because
for it. I like it.
Without knowing the full set of rules that go with it.
Yes.
I just love Mike, appreciate all Mike's work. Yeah. We're having a designer conversation.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
If you can no longer count as an enemy or an ally for any effects, that requires a redesign of many, many things in the system.
Like healing spells, maybe, but you're still creature. It depends.
Right. Like powers that a paladin might have of
right.
If you're right, you can lay on hands on an ally. Right. If I don't know that it says that.
Right. But you have to look for that. I'm
sure there are things in the game right now that say that.
Yeah.
I love this. I played with this idea of ally for a transformation that we're doing for Ghostfire Gaming. Whereas, what are some of the bad effects of you having this transformation? One of them is you cannot be considered an ally to anyone because of this horrendous mental and physical transformation that's taking place. So I love the idea of playing with it. You just need to look at the ramifications of all of this. Yeah. So it's fine to say that none of these effects that affect an ally or an enemy are going to affect you, but then you literally need to go through every single power, every single spell of the rest of your game and make it a thing still.
Yeah.
Or get rid of it completely. And so you have to be very, very careful right there. And then in the storytelling of the game, while you're dying, not to it almost seems like the cage comes down around you the way this is being described. all duration of all effects, spells, and features that you control. Okay. That I can see maybe. Um, okay. It again, you have to go back and you have to look at what that actually means with all the spells that you could cast, all the effects that you can take. Um,
Yeah.
if you summon something that's supposed to be there for an hour, does that count as a duration? Right? It's you're starting to get into territory where you need to really,
Mhm.
really think that through.
Yeah, you'd have to. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The thing I did think about that ally aspect, but I sort of discounted as this is early enough that, I'm
Yeah.
sure Mike will go back and check on this because he's more than a competent designer. But you're right. It's a
Yeah.
thing that you have to ask yourself, am I causing trouble by adding this? And what's the benefit of adding this no ally, no enemy thing? Maybe he's going to dig in a lot more into that sort of rules angle
Mhm.
elsewhere in the
Mhm.
game, and therefore this makes sense. But you have to do
Yeah.
that due diligence and go through everything to make sure it still works.
Yeah.
Um, it's also interesting the kind of all these features you end. I was trying to remember where in 2024 5e it tells you that all that happens. The only thing I see is being incapacitated, your concentration is broken, and maybe that's how they're
Exactly.
sort of covering all of it. So here you're kind of stating this, and sometimes in stating it, that's also you've got to look through all this like features you control. So if it's a feature you don't control, it's still active. Someone else put it on you, that's okay. You have to
Right.
think through these things. Um, the failed death saves is interesting, right? So the very clear thing is
Mhm.
3 failed saves was death. Now you
Right.
get an extra layer, right? The third one is now half hit points. So here, and then you're kind of like, well, why does that matter, right? And most battles would this even matter? Well, it's gonna matter because spoiler, your failed death saves don't reset after an encounter.
Mhm.
You're going to carry them forward. So
Mhm.
that's why this is happening. And just at this point, what I immediately thought was, but taking damage when you are dying advances this track still.
Mhm.
And I don't know for sure. I'd have to play test and find out, but I would probably take that out because that is the number one thing that I see that actually kills a character is
Mhm.
you have a death save, you take damage from a couple of sources and you're out. You're done,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem is just multiple sources of damage. That's very easy to happen. And if this track never
Mhm.
resets, being down and taking another point of damage, you're just 2 combats and you could be out of there. But that assumes that you're even going down in the first place, and getting characters to go unconscious can be rare. As I think you
Yeah.
said recently, so rare that people will say that their character's dead when they're unconscious, right? Because
Right. Yeah. It, right now, this is a game.
Mhm.
So right now, the truly tactical gamer will see one of their party members go down, and it will just become a decision tree, right? It will become a decision tree of one extra person down means one less person doing damage, one less person soaking up damage, unless the game master is going to attack a fallen foe. We know that they have 3 turns, generally, at least, with which to go. So you start doing this cost benefit
Yeah,
analysis. Um, and what I would love, and I don't know, I'd have to think very strongly about this. What I would love to see is something where that cost benefit analysis becomes less black and white,
sure.
uh, where you don't know what the best thing to do because it's a
Mm.
little more random. Uh, because
Mm.
there's a little more in there. So, in essence, I would love to see an effect for each failed death save. The first effect being slight, the second effect being a little more, the third effect being maybe what's there.
Mm.
Because that then adds just one more lever that it's harder for the tactician to say, well, it's clearly better right now to let the person stay down and for me to cast the spell.
Sure. Right. So hearing what you're saying, this third failed death save that makes your hit points halved, that's actually pretty severe when you realize it continues past the encounter, right?
Yes.
That's like being hit by, one of these life drain undead.
Yeah.
And the rest of the, day is going to be like that. That's severe, right? You're now talking that's every combat if you go down. Going down now becomes, you don't actually want that third failed save. It won't kill you, but it will severely impact you for the end unless you can change that. So let's read the rest of these rules if you're game.
Yep. Go ahead.
So, or
recovery.
at least take the next step. Yeah. Go for it.
Yeah. So recovery, as soon as you receive one or more hit points of healing, you are no longer dying and unconscious. However, you still suffer the effects of your failed death saves, if any. If you take enough damage to become dying again, you still count your prior failed death saves. So it's almost like a separate track that you're on, and you stay on that track. Stabilize. You can use an action to make a DC 10 intelligence medicine check to stabilize a dying creature. Stabilized creature automatically succeeds on death saves until they take any more damage. Then it starts dying once more. If it received any healing, it recovers as described above.
Yeah.
So stabilizing a creature, let me think this through. Stabilizing a creature automatically succeeds death saves until it takes any more damage. So you're not conscious,
right?
But you're not dying.
You're not rolling. You can't go forward. So it's a nice way to keep someone from going from 1 to 3, for example.
Okay.
But if they take more damage, now they. And one thing that's not clear. So you're stable. You take damage. Do I immediately roll a failed death save, or am I now back in the state where I make failed death saves?
Right.
I think I know what Mike wants, but.
Yeah, I assume you would make a death save at the start of your turn. That would have to be spelled out, but I assume that's when you would make it, not whenever you take damage.
Let's see. Well, dying is when you are at 0 hit points. Yeah, stabilize needs to tell you whether you are no longer dying but are on like something like that. So there's a little piece to work out there to make sure you know that.
Yeah.
All right. So
how do you remove a failed death save, Teos?
While you are at your maximum hit points, you remove 1 failed death save and its effects after a long rest. Note that in the case of having 2 failed death saves, your maximum hit points are then restored to normal, requiring more healing to reach your maximum, and then remove more failed death save. A little quickly written, but I guess the point is, so if you're bloodied hit points because you're at failed death save, you have to first get to that total, then remove your failed death save, now get to your maximum hit points, and now remove those other ones, is what I'm reading?
Yeah.
Fair bit?
Yeah. It needed to be said, because otherwise you'd be asking, all right, I took a long rest. Do I remove that and then automatically get all my hit points back? And he's saying no.
And that's rough, right? Because it means that you would need 2 long rests to be fully out if you had just 2 failed, 3 failed death saves, it should say. All right, so if you have 3 failed death saves,
in case of having,
so 3 failed death saves, you would have to first heal yourself. Someone would have to heal you to your max bloodied HP.
Your bloodied max.
If you're not already there. Yep, your bloodied max.
Yeah.
Now you got to take a long rest to cure that level. Now someone has to heal you to full, and then you can cure the other 2 levels.
Yeah.
Well, actually, each long rest is only 1 failed death save removed. So that's a lot of days.
Right.
That's interesting.
That's If you're at 3, that's 3 days of long rests. Now we would also want Mike to tell us what a long rest is, how many you could take.
That's true.
Because that plays into this. If you can take 3 long rests in a day, 8 hours, then that's one thing.
Yeah, and all of this goes away if like Wrestler Restoration removes all this or something, right? And it becomes a totally different equation where now you must have a cleric, or if you do have a cleric, it's one way to play, and if you don't, it's another way, or Yeah.
Now, what about things like starvation, drowning, or extreme temperatures?
Yeah, so this is the last part is most effects that grant exhaustion now grant failed death saves. There are likely exceptions that I need to work around, Mike writes, but the intent is to replace exhaustion levels with failed death saves. So, you're traversing through the wilderness and there's this situation that would, you failed some check and you're going to get a level of exhaustion. Well, really what you're doing is getting a failed death save. I don't know whether you get to make that saving throw to see whether you get the level, or do you get the level because you already failed a check? Like I failed against the avalanche. Do I gain a failed death save, or do I make a death save to see if I get worse? Right? Not quite clear, but it's an interesting effect. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I like it. I like if you're going to get rid of exhaustion, but still want to have exhaustion-like effects. I like what Mike is thinking. I like the direction in which he's thinking. And that's another reason why I would add some small effect after 1 and 2 failed death saves. So you could have a consequence for taking a failed death save when you are exhausted, when you are right in need of hydration or in need of food, or traveling through the desert and succumbing to the heat in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I always struggle with exhaustion and making you less capable in a game that's all about you being capable. Is rough, and it can turn players off of interacting. Or make them feel like everything has become a slog and it is an uphill battle in a non-fun way, right? And so I'm always conscious of that. I would want to play test this, and I'm sure Mike will, as it is, with the premise that I would want more than 4 failed death saves on this track, and probably no effect for the first one, but something minor for a second, and either third or fourth that gets inserted in between, either before or after 3. I'd probably want a new 3 or a new 4, just to make it a little long, so that these exhaustion things can work. And because I just worry that in many, if we're talking about 3 days worth of play, if you're having the 1 encounter per day and you're doing a hard, or like a very deadly type hard encounter to challenge characters, well, those death saves might kind of add up effect wise. If you're in a dungeon, it could be brutal, right? Where you have lots and lots of opportunities and you're going through all those things with, say, half hit points, right? That going down becomes really tough. Like level 3 becomes giantly a problem, right? You have half your hit points. That's twice the opportunity to go unconscious compared to before. And
yeah, both of those points are well taken. You would need effects that don't do what exhaustion did or currently does, because you're right. Now, I think players would be more accepting of half hit points, right? Half your bloodied level is your maximum, because that's not something that is stopping them or affecting their play roll by roll.
You're right. So, I super agree with that. And the DM is happy, right? Because now you can threaten more easily versus so many times you can't. Even the paladin with the absurd, the paladin who's multi-classed and has shield and the absurd AC is now closer to being vulnerable and actually enjoy some fun for the DM.
Yep. So interesting all around there. We will continue to keep an eye on Mike's Patreon and see what else he discusses as he moves forward. We have news about a jail-compliant free role-playing game. If you've listened to the show before, you've heard us talk about a story that talked about people in jail wanting to play role-playing games but not being allowed to, sometimes because of the mechanics being problematic, sometimes because of the content being problematic. Gambling is often not allowed, so things like dice aren't allowed. So this new game from Bull Press has been offered to position themselves as a conversational game. What did you learn about this, Teos, in this article?
It's really impressive. So the website states, quote, free does not mean low effort. We put thousands of collective hours into these games. They are free because we are idealists, which I appreciate. They have a variety of RPGs available, all for free. There is a printable spinner that's provided instead of dice, so you can use like one of those like brass fasteners that you twist the kind of bottoms on the other side, and then you can rotate these dials, these circular dials of on flat paper, and determine outcomes that way. So most of the books kind of have that as part of it. Bull Press will cover all costs and will respond to requests sending printed books complying with prison codes directly to those facilities.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep. And this news came to us via Keith Ammon, who spotted a post on Bluesky that discussed the soundness of the design behind their role-playing game.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was talking about the Illadelph game, which is one of their many there that they have.
Okay, cool. So there's a link in our show notes to that Bluesky article that leads on to the rest of the content. And speaking of Keith Hammond, he is a friend of the show and supporter of the show, and he has a new blog called 1 Foot in Fairyland. So Keith, of course, you know from The Monsters Know What They're Doing. And so this is something new from Keith. What did you take from this article, Teos?
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So he has a 2-part series that he actually shared part of it on our Discord first, and was conversing about sort of what he wanted to do with a second blog. So he compares the same character, and I believe it's his wife's character, that had to go through converting, I think, from 2014 to 2024, and noting how the concept behind the character, to just change it from 2014 to 2024 significantly changes the character itself and makes it hard to be exactly what that personality was. So he got into like, well, how do other systems transform the concept? And how do I, like, for example, in Shadow Dark, where I'm all about my glaive, but Shadow Dark doesn't have glaive as a weapon. Okay, well, I can call it this, but does that impact my play? And when I go into Cypher System, and now I've got to come up with different mechanics and explain what I am. All right, how do I capture that concept? And then even Pathfinder. So it's really interesting to look through this. It's actually quite fascinating and speaks to really kind of key design concepts that change out a character. So I liked it.
Yep. So yeah, that's interesting. And we've got a link up in the show notes, but this is Keith's alternate blog from The Monsters Know What They're Doing called 1 Foot in Fairyland. So you can see that at onefootinfairyland.com. And now to our creator corner. We have the news that Moonbeam has launched its streaming platform. We announced this when it was first talked about, but now it is up and available. Moonbeam is a streaming platform and a community hub focused on the TTRPG hobby. The service launched in its alpha form, where creators can stream their video creations, whether it's actual plays, how-tos, or whatever you are looking to stream. There's an app now also for iOS and Android. And in a video last week, our friend of the show, Anthony Joyce Rivera, covered how to stream on the platform. So if you're interested, there's a link in our show notes to the YouTube video where Anthony does that. They support creators streaming to all platforms, in addition to streaming through Moonbeam itself. So you can also go to alpha.moonbeam.stream or go to the YouTube video of Anthony showing how.
Yeah, and it's open to folks who have alpha access. So it's some creators and folks who backed their crowdfunding. And you may recall we talked about this before, like a number of companies were part of that crowdfunding effort, kind of working together to fund the whole platform. And so you can find what those companies are doing there as well. But it's neat to start seeing this coming along. It is, of course, a very, very tough thing to take on YouTube. And there are a number of groups who try. It is difficult to take on Twitch or any of these. But that focus on our hobby space is something kind of unique and interesting. And so we'll look forward to seeing how this progresses.